There's a major thing that Congress is going to have to be responsible for next year, and that is what to do with the 2017 package of tax cuts, which expire, I guess the Trump tax cuts, as some call them, that expire at the end of 2025. So Congress in the first half of the year is going to have to decide whether to extend those tax cuts, make them permanent, or allow them to expire. And if they allow them to expire, it would be the largest tax increase in the history of the country. But there's some big things in there. There's for small businesses, large tax, like a $20,000 tax credit right off the top that people have been enjoying, and that could go away. There's of course a reduction right now in the corporate tax rate that would go up if it were allowed to expire. There's a lot of preferential treatment for pass-through entities, S corps, LLCs, that would go away. And so I think that this is going to be an important year for a lot of people's bottom lines next year in Congress. And again, I'm all about making sure that people have more capital in their pockets so that they can invest, so that they can innovate, so that they can go out and buy more properties, and that they have the tools that they need, whether it's just having more money available or having tax credits available, but also things like, tools like seller finance, which we can talk about later. All of these things are under threat in Washington.
Well, I can tell you we did seller finance a handful of properties when we got started. It wasn't until the federal government decided to protect buyers with the Dodd-Frank Act that it just became ridiculous. It just wasn't worth the hassle of doing it. And now the only ones we sell are basically to the contractors or employees that work for us that we want to try and help out. It's just not a big part of our business model because the government made it too difficult for us to turn tenants into homeowners. I believe that's one of those unintended consequences. What are some of the things that you see with the taxes you're talking about? And people love to call this the Trump tax. Well, tell me somebody on the other side of the aisle that really wants to pay more in taxes, because nobody comes up to me and says, man, Trump gave me this tax break and that's why I hate him. I wish I could pay more.
Yeah. Well, and the few people who do get up and say, I'd willingly pay more taxes for X, Y, and Z, you can voluntarily do that. Feel free.
It's
Feel
in the
free.
IRS code. We looked it up. You can make a donation to the IRS. Please do that so we don't have to.
Look, I think the basic goals out of tax reform next year ought to be real simple. Keep the individual income tax low. Keep the corporate tax at a competitive rate with the rest of the world. I actually think it could be lower than it is right now, but certainly don't raise it. Make sure that you
let me stop you there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue. We think too much alike. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate for many of these issues. But why are you giving these big greedy corporations? Forget about the fact that many of these corporations are not BlackRock. They are a small family office or something like that.
Right.
And all of the corporate taxes, that is just double taxation when you're taxed as a C Corp. That first the corporation pays taxes, and then the individuals that make the dividends pay taxes again. So how would it benefit America as a whole, which I am completely in agreement that we should have very, very low corporate taxes. But how would that benefit us as a whole for both the workers, the citizens, the customers, everyone?
On the government side of it, keeping government or putting government on a diet and not feeding its insatiable need to spend money is the key. The key to most of the ills that we talk about in this country and I hear about door to door are all go back to the overspending, the borrowing, and the printing of money whenever they need to splash out to go buy votes or do whatever it is somebody cooked up in their brains to spend everybody else's money. And all that does is it raises the price of groceries and energy and cars and houses and everything else that we buy in our lives. And of course, the cost of doing business. So that's one. Don't put more money into this insatiable beast. Number two, on the business side, obviously, and people in office need to realize these aren't charities and they're not nonprofits. They exist to provide a good or service and do so in a way that is profitable to the people that are invested in that business. And to do that, you've got to make sure that your cost of doing business is reasonable, that your tax structure, that your regulatory structure, that your legal environment is competitive with the rest of the world and is competitive in the current market and economy. And it translates into wages that are paid. If you're going to raise taxes on the corporate side, then that means you're probably going to have room to employ fewer people. You're probably going to have room to invest in fewer places. You're probably going to have less room to increase wages so that they can keep up with the cost of these prices.
Okay, you run a business, as do we. Can you explain to me how any business owner in any business, if they have to pay for legal fees and taxes, and they still have to buy products, and then they have to pay their employees to shape the products, if my all-in cost are $105 per widget, can you explain to me how to sell that for $100? Is that possible to make up in volume?
Nope. The only way would be magical subsidies out of the sky. And I know there are some people that believe in that, but that is not a good recipe for economic success for our country going forward, or ultimately good for wages or prices of goods that we purchase.
And that is the essence of inflation. Anybody that wants to look at the symptom and not the root cause of inflation, you hit it the nail on the head. We need to starve the government. We need politicians. We need congressmen like you to go in and say, no, I won't vote for this omnibus bill, not vote for things that are just going to make our $35 trillion deficit become, or debt, excuse me, debt become worse. We already have $2 to $3 trillion deficit every year. That's completely unsustainable.
That's right. I've watched over our lifetimes Congress basically throw up their hands and give up authority to the federal agencies. There's 435 or so federal agencies out there. They're all making laws in the form of regulations. They're making law. Let's just be clear. It's law that they're making that impacts all of us on a regular basis without oversight from Congress. Part of that is that Congress doesn't have any authority to weigh in on rules and regulations before they go into effect, and they should, like most states do. We do that in Ohio. But second, Congress has sort of given up on proper appropriations and doing proper budgets. It's supposed to be, there are 12 federal budgets. You're supposed to pass 12 federal budget bills. And the House has passed a lot of bills, the Senate won't pass them. And so you end up doing these continuing resolutions that simply pump more money into this same bloated system without any oversight or reform. If you do appropriations in Congress the right way, you have oversight. If you want the money, you got to dance to our tune. You got to be within your authority. You have to follow congressional intent. You have to make sure that you took business impact into account, and you did fiscal statements, and you took public comment into account. They don't do any of that right now because they've just thrown up their hands and said, we're not going to do this because we can't come to an agreement on anything. And that's got to change.